I played Doom the Dark Ages, and I thought it was pretty cool. Granted, I love all of the id Doom games, so I expected to like it, but I didn't go into it with nearly the hype I had for Eternal. Eternal had so many elements to it that were such a letdown, even though the overall product is still fantastic. So I learned to temper my expectations when it comes to Doom. And I think that was a good thing, because while Doom the Dark Ages is fantastic, there were some things missing from it. So it's not super cool, it's only pretty cool. Now before we get into the meat of the gameplay, we need to eat the vegetables of the story. I will be spoiling things, so if you haven't already, I would recommend just go and play it. It's good. Doom the Dark Ages is a prequel to Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, taking place before the Doom Slayer is trapped in a coffin that he wakes up in 2016. Admittedly, I won't be doing a super deep analysis of the story, just because I don't really know what's going on. The plot was lost in Eternal, and while this story does feel much more cohesive, there's just so much weird lore that doesn't really line up with what was set up in the previous games that I can't adequately understand or explain it in depth. I don't like the direction they've gone with these games story-wise. It's all gotten too wacky and complicated for where it was set up in 2016. However, once you accept the fact that this is just the franchise, I think the story in the Dark Ages is actually pretty decent. It kept me engaged and didn't actively frustrate me with how stupid it was. So for a Doom game, that's pretty good. For starters, the campaign is much longer now. In the previous entries, there are only 13 campaign levels, but here, there are 22, almost double. The reason for this is they decided not to have a multiplayer mode in the Dark Ages, so they could allocate all those resources to the campaign. Now, I briefly played the multiplayer on the other two games. I thought it was kind of meh. I would have happily swapped out the multiplayer for an extra few campaign levels, so the fact they actually did that in this game, I think that's a good change. If they do decide to add a multiplayer into Doom games going forward, just make a multiplayer campaign. It's so simple and focuses on the fun parts of the game. I feel like that should be a no-brainer. Anyway, the gist of the plot is that the Doom Slayer and the Night Sentinels are fighting off the forces of Hell, while the leader of Hell's armies, Prince Osric, searches for something the Night Sentinels have called the Heart of Argent, which should give him the power of a god. Meanwhile, you have the Creed Maker, a bishop in the Maker Society that is in control of Doom Guy and sort of playing both sides. And then there's also the Witch, a sorceress from the Cosmic Dimension, who is also working with Hell. I'll start off with some of the stuff I liked. First, while I think the story and lore of these games has gotten quite bizarre, this was actually a pretty interesting direction to go with it. Things like seeing the hierarchy of Maker and Hell societies or finding other dimensions like Cthulhu World were pretty cool. They expanded the universe in a way that didn't feel totally forced, but instead actually fleshed out the more interesting parts of it. I really enjoyed seeing Night Sentinel cities and citizens before they returned into ruins, or Maker drones in their natural, non-demonic state. Its world building sort of reminded me of Andor, of all things. Am I only saying this because I watched Andor at the same time as playing this game? Almost definitely. Now don't get me wrong, between the Dark Ages and Andor, one is clearly better than the other in terms of writing. But there are some similarities, mostly in the fun ways they expand the world on a smaller scale. There's a moment when Bishop Creed mentions the Khan Maker, and it gave me the exact same feelings when a character in Andor brought up Palpatine. You don't actually see the big bad of the series, but their presence is felt. Meanwhile, you spend the game fighting off comparatively lesser villains than what we faced in the past, but it gives the world a more lived-in feel and establishes more of a hierarchy in these societies, instead of just one ruler and a bunch of minions. I like that. It adds more depth and nuance than what we've had in the past. I also really like the villains in this game, specifically Prince Osric, whatever. I think he's my favorite villain in the series. He's competent and intimidating, unlike the Khan Maker, but he's also present throughout the whole game, unlike Olivia Pierce. And he has an awesome voice with a dope design.
All the power of hell, cowering before one man.
But I also like the Witch as sort of a spooky advisor. I wish we got more from her, honestly. The Creed Maker, who I guess is a twist villain, was also enjoyable. I mean, I figured he was going to betray us the instant I saw him because they wouldn't have made him fat if he was a good guy. But most importantly, you fight Cthulhu in a do-rag. So, 10 out of 10. I was a bit surprised by the characters they did choose to focus on. The 5 most important characters in this game are Prince Osric, the Witch, Commander Thera, the Creed Maker, and Doom Guy. Those are all original characters to this game, besides Doom Guy, of course. You have some other people from previous games like King Novik and Commander Valen, but they didn't really do much. They're just kind of there, which surprised me. I figured they were going to flesh out the previously established characters, but they introduced new ones and made them interesting instead, which was cool. I was sure they were going to have Samuel Hayden and Vega in this game too, in their lame god forms. Thankfully, they're nowhere to be seen, so that was a relief. Overall, I enjoyed the story. It's funny, because if this game came out after 2016 instead of Eternal, I would be going nuts on it for being so bananas with the lore. But since Eternal already did that, I was much more prepared for it to get weird. Honestly, the story could have been nothing but TV static, and I still probably would have liked it more than Eternals. I really knew I was invested whenever I would finish a level and would be about to get off, but I started the next level just to see the cutscene for it. And that leads me into my next point. The presentation. The Dark Ages has a vibe to it. Like 2016, but reverse the sci-fi and fantasy settings. And since I love the aesthetic of 2016, and I love fantasy, this is really a match made in heaven. That's another thing that I felt Eternal lacked, was a true vibe or atmosphere, so I'm glad they brought that back in this game. Now in my Eternal video, I did say I didn't like how Eternal leaned into the fantasy more because it contrasted with the sci-fi in a non-complimentary way. However, the Dark Ages leans so heavily into fantasy that it actually manages to both give it that vital atmosphere that it desperately needs, while also making the sci-fi elements add to the game instead of causing a tonal inconsistency. It's like, in Eternal, the fantasy and sci-fi were both main courses competing for space on the same meal, whereas in the Dark Ages, the sci-fi is more of a seasoning rather than a main course, so it complements the dish rather than overcrowds it. Now, I still do prefer 2016 in terms of atmosphere, mainly because 2016's never breaking the first-person perspective adds so much to the immersion of that game, and the Dark Ages doesn't do that. But that is another thing I wanted to touch on. I really like the cutscenes in this game. I would prefer they weren't here at all, but since we do have them, at least they're good. For starters, they look fantastic. It's incredible what 5 years can do for a studio in terms of graphical advancements. The characters look and move better, the camera movements are more dynamic, and the overall quality is just higher. It also helps that the content of the cutscenes is interesting too. Honestly, this whole game just feels like it's a higher level of quality than the past ones. Like 2016 and Eternal, there was a part of me that always thought they weren't really games, they were Doom games, if that makes sense. The Dark Ages, I never really had that thought. I always thought this feels like an actual game. There is a part of me that is gonna miss the jank of the other two because they sort of gave it some more personality and made it feel like a Doom game, but I'm not gonna critique this one being too well made because that would just be silly. I just can't get over the feel of this game. It is so heavy metal fantasy, and I love it. This also applies to the environments. They're vibrant and diverse, yet still have a connective tissue that makes them feel like a part of the same game. I really enjoyed the exploration. I was surprised how in-depth some of the hidden areas were, or how much of the map was purely secret items. I spent a ton of time walking around looking for secrets or appreciating the design of the game, not to mention new additions like actual NPCs that react to you, or unique places that we've never seen before. It made it a very fun experience. I think all the enemy redesigns work too, like imps, hell priests, revenants. It all looks great. Even the weapons have more of a mechanical feel that adds so much to the immersion. Doom Guy specifically has my favorite look ever here. The fur cape with the bulky spiked suit. Oh, it's so sweet. And it really complements the gameplay as well, which is as good of a transition as any. The gameplay. Now for the real meat and potatoes. Obviously, this game, much like 2016 to Eternal, is a massive departure from the previous entry. In fact, I'd say the Dark Ages is a bigger departure from Eternal than Eternal was from 2016. You could argue Eternal's gameplay was simply the evolution of 2016, that it was everything in the original game, but amped up to 11. The Dark Ages is just a completely different game with completely different systems. If Eternal is on one end of the spectrum, the Dark Ages is on the complete other side of it, with 2016 being somewhere in the middle, but closer to Eternal. And that's not a bad thing. It became evident towards the end of Eternal's DLCs that they had pushed that particular gameplay system to its limit. So I like that they shook things up again. The best way I would describe the Dark Ages gameplay is meaty. You move much slower, but you also pack a bigger punch. If 2016 was a run and gun and Eternal was a dash and slash, then the Dark Ages is a ground and pound. The big new item in this game is the shield saw. Somewhat similar to the meat hook, the core gameplay is focused around it, which is a great idea because it's probably the best addition into the game. You can throw it at enemies to stun or kill them, shield bash them to close gaps and deal damage, and you can block and parry enemy attacks. This thing is so great for so many reasons. I love a good parry system. Something that I didn't mention in my Doom Eternal video is that after Eternal, Sekiro is my favorite gameplay ever, which is a very parry focused game. So that being added into Doom is such a treat. Not to mention that I am such a slut for cool shields in games. This is genuinely my actual build in Elden Ring. So I am definitely a shielding Sharon, and I love that it's added into a Doom game. There's some other fun additions in the game, like armored, shielded, or empowered enemies add a bit of variety to the gameplay. Another thing they added that I think was neat is a new difficulty system. They still have the standard easy, medium, hard, super hard difficulty settings, but you can also customize a ton of other aspects about the game, like enemy aggressiveness, health and ammo drop values, projectile speed, overall game speed, and way more. I really like this. If there's any sort of complaints about the gameplay, which admittedly I do have, they're probably only a result of not messing around with these difficulty customization options, because things like saying the game is too slow or too hard can be directly addressed through the screen, so you can customize the game to your exact preferences for the most part. Now, ironically, with that being said, I quickly encountered a big problem here. I was not good at this game to start. Maybe it was because I had played 2016 and Eternal right before playing the Dark Ages, so it threw me off because the Dark Ages is vastly different in terms of gameplay from the other two Doom games. My mind and hands were Eternal coded, so when I tried to play like that, it led to less than desirable results. But I don't really blame the game. I think it's more of a me issue because I have a friend who also played this game on a higher difficulty than me, and he said he thought it was way easier than 2016 Eternal, which I completely disagreed with. I did start to get better towards the end of the game, so I'm sure with more playing time I'll get a better feel for it, but this is all based off my first playthrough. Side note, but I can't imagine doing any Ultra Nightmare attempts on this one. I completed Ultra Nightmare in 2016 and Eternal through great struggle, but this seems like an entirely different beast. While I do appreciate the longer campaign just for having more content, that only provides more opportunities to choke on an Ultra Nightmare playthrough. And trust me, choke I will. However, this is also one where I feel like once you get really good at it, it could be easier to play Deathless than the previous Doom games. Having a shield gives you so much more control over the damage you take. So I may give it a shot once I play through it a few more times. All this is to say, I have some critiques for Doom the Dark Ages, both in gameplay and miscellaneous categories, but I don't believe my lack of skill is the sole reason I have these issues. For starters, your loadout. This game has a system where there are essentially 2 of each gun type and you can toggle between them on the weapon wheel. I tried using every gun in the game to get a feel for them, but it quickly became apparent that some guns were just not that useful, or there were better options that serve the exact same purpose. The biggest one is the pulverizer. It grinds up skulls and shoots the shards at enemies in a wide arc, but dealing low damage, taking out smaller enemies in a large area. It looks really cool, but the problem is that you have so many other options for crowd control that it seems pointless. You can throw your shield, you can shield bash, you can literally just jump. All of these are faster and don't cost any ammo. Or even like the plasma rifle, which shoots super fast but inaccurately, and then the other gun in that category, a slightly bigger plasma rifle that shoots a little less fast and a little more accurately. Once I got the bigger plasma rifle, I never touched the smaller one again. It didn't feel like they were different enough to justify an entirely new gun, so it seems like a bit of a step backwards from Eternal, which had pretty unique guns in every department, and I thought all of them were useful. But every gun does have their own upgrades, and they were fun to experiment with and see which ones you like playing with, so it's not like the guns don't have any unique or charming qualities. And the good guns are good, so lack of viable options isn't a major issue. On a brighter side, the melee attacks are the best they've ever been. You can choose between 3 different melee weapons: your fist, a flail, and a mace, which are essentially a light, medium, and heavy attack that can be recharged over time. I just think the melee strikes a good balance of being damaging and consistent and also cool. The slower pace of the game has pros and cons. For one, it's a very unique experience from the previous games, which were built and sold around speed. However, I think it's done well here. It almost has an arcade vibe to it, what with all the slow-moving projectiles and the methodical pace of everything. It flows well with the parry system too, because if they tried making parries a thing with Eternal speed, ooh, it would be a hot mess. However, I think one of the bigger issues is a result of the slow pace. The game started to get a bit repetitive by the end. Now, this could just be because the game is longer. I didn't feel like getting monotonous until the last few levels, so maybe if it was only 13 levels, I wouldn't have felt that way. Not saying having more levels is bad though, I'm always happy to have more content. But I think the main reason for it is due to the lack of enemy speed, they don't really move that much, so a lot of the arenas stay static. Most of them have a wave of smaller enemies near the front of the encounter, some mid-tier demons in the middle that do move around, and then the big mamas in the back that stay put. And since I was dying and replaying a lot of these encounters, they played out the same way almost every time because the enemies would basically be in the same spot, which was not much of an issue in previous games, which were much more fluid. But the biggest problem with this game's combat is something that I was very worried about going into it, and unfortunately, it was worse than I was expecting. Doom the Dark Ages doesn't feature glory kills. Sort of. Now what I mean by that is there are technically still glory kills on bigger enemies, but for the most part it's just a generic punch animation, not the standout murder clip we used to get. You can get some unique animations, but it seemingly happens at random. I can never find a way to get it consistently, and smaller enemies just can't be staggered at all, so they can't be glory killed. I do not like this change one bit. The reason the developers gave so they wanted to make it so you could do a glory kill from all directions, which doesn't make any sense because you could already do that. In fact, they had unique animations depending on what direction and angle you perform the glory kill at. So obviously, that was a lie. The real reason, I assume, is that they just didn't want to animate all the new glory kills, which, sure, I could sympathize. But one, just say that and don't lie about it actually making the game better somehow. Two, there are plenty of other things that should have been cut in this game prior to glory kills. And three, I don't think they realize how vital glory kills are to Doom. I'm sure that this has been talked to death, but glory kills are what make Doom work. They force the player to be aggressive and reward you for doing so with health. You take them away, and you have a lot more instances of players running away and taking cover, which I found myself doing way more often in this game than I ever had before. In a game that has such a strong focus on shield blocking and close range combat, The optimal strategy should be to be aggressive and get close to enemies, but without glory kills, I felt less incentivized to do so. I can't tell you how many times I would be low on health and my brain would just break, and I would be thinking, how do I get health? That's never a thought I had in the previous 2 games because I always knew it was glory kills. To be fair to the Dark Ages, you do still get health from killing enemies normally, but it's only whenever you're low on health, so you can't get back to full health without a pickup. And you could argue smaller enemies not getting staggered only contributes more to the feeling of Doom Guy is so strong that he literally breaks them before being able to stagger them. I'm not saying that because I don't think it justifies removing glory kills, but you could. Not to mention, I think this may be one of the reasons I felt the game getting monotonous. Repetitive glory kill animations, or none at all, takes away a major element of both gameplay and the overall experience. Bad decision, id. That major blunder aside, I really did like the gameplay. It's meaty and heavy and gives a satisfying thump. It's just unfortunate that's in the Doom series because it's probably the weakest of the 3 games in terms of gameplay, but that still puts it above 99% of every other shooter's gameplay. Some other tidbits I wanted to mention. First of all, this game has something that I never knew I needed in a Doom game until I got it. Destructible environments. Contributing to that feeling of weight. There's something so satisfying about being able to shoot or walk through a barricade and it actually gets destroyed, or walls having different textures based on whether or not you shot them. I'm showing the moment I first realized that I could destroy the environment, and I hope the giddiness and joy that I felt in that moment is coming through the screen. You feel so much stronger in this game, and I think this is a huge reason why. There are a few levels in this game where you ride on a dragon or control a giant mech suit, and at first I thought they was going to be sort of gimmicky filler levels, and I guess they kind of are, but honestly, they were a lot more fun than I thought they would be. Sure, the gameplay on these parts isn't exactly super complex, but they're used pretty sparingly, so I think it's a nice break from the regular combat. I really liked in the dragon levels how you could land on different areas of the map. I thought it was a fun way to explore. And then the mech suit levels had a lot of fun environmental destruction. I especially loved in these levels how you could see the enemies on the ground, and they were super teensy tiny, but then you could even kill them. Like, that was such a fun detail. I love that. The music was a point of contention after Doom Eternal, given the Mick Gordon situation, who is no longer with the company. The general rundown is that for Doom Eternal, it said Mick Gordon didn't provide the music he was supposed to, and Mick Gordon said they didn't give him enough time or resources, and then they also didn't pay him. I'm inclined to believe Mick Gordon on this, given he had a massive document proving everything he said, and it didn't. So I wasn't exactly optimistic for the soundtrack. And while yes, it isn't as good as what Mick has provided in previous games, it's not bad. It serves its purpose fine enough. I obviously wish Mick Gordon was a part of this franchise still, given how he seemingly understood it so well. I'm sure if he was a part of this game, the music would have been better. But as of right now, it's good. Gets the point across, but I'm not going out of my way to add any of the songs here onto my Spotify playlist or anything like that. It doesn't stand out like the soundtracks have in the past. But what does stand out is the sound design. It is crisp. From the first level, there's rain and oceans, and then the guns sound so deep and meaty, and it all sounds so good. Even just walking by fires or NPCs talking, they did such a great job here that I really feel like I need to shout them out. The Dark Ages also has an enemy degradation system. I'm not really sure what to call it. It was in Eternal 2, where basically whenever you damage enemies, you can see the physical damage on them. But I really just wanted to mention, because it feels like in this game, it's more in-depth and detailed. And there's even this little bit I noticed where if you shoot the bigger enemies on the arms, their arms will fall off. And so if you shoot off one of their arms, they just do less attacks. But if you shoot off both their arms, they just kind of stand there and waddle around. And it's just so funny. I love this little aspect of it. It's sort of the essence of the weak point system from Eternal into this game, and I just really like it. It's a perfect blend of gameplay and visual effects working together to create a fun experience. There is one arena where you get the Rage power-up, or maybe it's the Berserk power-up, I forget. In past game, this allows you to instantly glory kill enemies. It's a very cathartic way to relieve some stress. Since that's not really a thing here, you just get unlimited melee attacks, and I need you to believe me when I say, this was one of the most upsetting moments in gaming for me ever. You see, when you do multiple melee attacks consecutively, there's a weird buffer that happens, especially when you use the mace, since it's so slow and you usually only have one charge with it. But since you have unlimited charges here, it still attacks repeatedly, but at a weird pace. It was so sluggish that the enemies were killing me before I could even hit them. I hated this part. The Berserk power-ups are supposed to be moments of cathartic violence, but I literally couldn't kill the enemies because of the way the melee weapons worked. So instead of being a nice vacation of murder, it only reminded me of better times when I could glory kill and rip demons' heads off. Very frustrating moment, and they shouldn't have even bothered putting it in the game because it made me so upset. Like putting PhD in Die Rise. Absolutely tragic. Then there's the final boss fight, or final 2 boss fights, which I found very confusing. The second to last boss fight, you fight Prince Azrak after he gets the Heart of Argent upgrade, and it was cool. It was very difficult for me because I tried using the super shotgun for it, but it was annoyingly like a millisecond too slow to shoot and reload before he hits you again. So I died a lot before I realized the Impaler makes this boss fight so much easier. It's a good fight though, challenging but fun. However, for some reason, this isn't the final fight of the game. The actual final fight is against Prince Osric again, without the Heart of Argent power-up, and the Witch at the same time. The problem is, this fight is so easy, I think I died maybe once? I understand having a fight against the two main villains as the final showdown, but Prince Osric literally had God mode activated in the other fight, so he's just comically weaker here. And the Witch doesn't add that much difficulty to it. She's more of a support character than an actual boss. It would have made so much more sense both narratively and from a gameplay perspective to have this fight first, and then the Osric Super Saiyan as the final boss. So I didn't really understand the pacing of that. The game ends with Doomguy killing the Creed Maker and the Witch and Prince Osric, and then goes back to hell to fight all the demons while the Night Sentinels regroup. And meanwhile, the Makers are like, oopsies, Creed Maker struck a deal with hell on its own, not our fault. And that's the end of the game. So, in summary, Doom the Dark Ages was another great addition into the Doom franchise. I loved the atmosphere, and the gameplay grew on me as it went on. It even set up a story I'm interested in seeing, even if I already know how it'll likely play out since it's a prequel. Some changes, like the lengthened campaign or shield saw, were inspired. Other changes, like the lack of glory kills, were less so. It made the game feel like not Doom at parts, which is a darn shame. But I said this about Eternal, and I'll say it for the Dark Ages. I respect the heck out of id for not settling with what works. After the success of Eternal, they could have just made another one with the same gameplay and changed up the levels a bit, but they wanted to create something different. They made 3 games in this franchise, and they're all unique. 2016 is completely different from Eternal, which is completely different from the Dark Ages, which is completely different from 2016. For better or worse, Doom the Dark Ages is its own game. Now let's compare it to other games. If I did a ranking of the new Doom games, I would probably put the Dark Ages 3rd. Not because I didn't like it, I think it was great. But Eternal and 2016 are just some of my favorite games of all time, so it's hard to compete with them. While I was dogging on Eternal a lot in this video, and rightfully so because it has some much lower lows than the Dark Ages, it also has higher highs, which is why I put it ahead of this one. In 2016, it's just my baby. I love that game so much, it'd be very hard for me to put another game in this franchise above it unless it truly blew me away. So those are my thoughts on Doom the Dark Ages. Let me know what you thought about the game in the comments below. I know I will be playing through it several more times, and maybe I'll do some Ultra Nightmare stuff if I feel confident. I appreciate the support in the past few videos. I love talking about Doom. But anyways, thanks you for watching. Bye bye!